I end up taking a little bit of anger out on my daughter.
That's what happened. I burned her recently.
How's it going? Good, how are you? Distressed.
Mr. Big comes in. He is supposedly the head of this criminal organization. In fact, he's a senior police officer.
You want my help?
Yes.
If you want my help, I need to know what the happened.
It's almost always a case where there's very strong suspicion, but there just isn't the evidence to prove it.
Yeah.
Watch out, now is the time, watch out for Mr. Big.
Yeah, agreed. 100%.
They got absolutely nothing but Mr. Big.
You need to scare no.
It's total risk.
Just easy.
Going too far. Relaxing.
Oh.
A little too good at what we do sometimes, I guess.
It's effective. It can be very useful.
Right there, yeah. And this really went off, one each.
However, there's a risk of wrongful convictions because of false confessions.
Welcome to Crime Beat. I'm Anthony Robart. When there is insufficient evidence or cooperation from a suspect, police are often left with few options. And that is when they may turn to one of their more controversial tools, the Mr. Big sting. This is an undercover operation aimed at getting confessions. Tonight, in a special edition of Crime Beat, we take you inside the world of Mr. Big and explore why this tactic continues to spark debate across the country. Here now is Jayme Doll with the Mr. Big Playbook.
911 for what city?
Calgary.
Do you need fire, police, or ambulance?
Ambulance. My daughter fell down the stairs, and she's not there. She's not conscious.
November the 13th, 2011, at about 7:18 p.m., EMS and CPS responded to a residence and on arrival found 6-year-old Mika Jordan unresponsive and in full cardiac arrest. She had abdominal trauma, head trauma. She had bruising throughout her body, a severe burn on her left hand, matted hair, obviously not an injury, but an interesting note.
Where's our phone?
I am.
And she had a torn frenulum and lip, and usually that's the result of a blow to the mouth.
There you go.
Good job.
Remember,
try again.
Mika was kept on life support until the next day, and at approximately 1:47 p.m. on November the 14th, and I'll never forget it, Mika passed away.
The first time we got to see her was when we finally realized how serious of a situation it actually was.
I was extremely shocked. As soon as we came into the hospital room and I had seen the machines and the tubes and just all of that stuff, I just kind of made an imprint in my own mind that this is not gonna end well.
Mika lived half the time with her biological mother and stepfather and the other half with her biological father and stepmother, Spencer Jordan and Marie Magoon. Mika was staying with them the weekend she was rushed to hospital. Her stepmother said she fell down the stairs, but police say her bruised and battered little body told a much more sinister and horrifying story.
Police can now reveal that the blunt force trauma injuries sustained by Mika were to her head and abdomen. They are not consistent with a fall down the flight of stairs.
Internal injuries, blunt force injuries, third-degree burns. At some point, you're not even discussing abuse, you're talking about torture.
Police don't believe Spencer and Marie's version of events, but they needed the evidence to prove it.
Spencer was unemployed and had been for quite some time. They were relying on a number of social agencies in order to pay the bills, but there's a lot of bills outstanding. They were in financial dire straits.
The couple's situation played perfectly into the new chapter undercover police were crafting for the pair. Investigators launched what has become known as a Mr. Big sting operation, a Canadian invention created in the 90s by RCMP in BC.
The police will usually engage in Mr. Big operations when they say to themselves, we have a very good suspect, we believe this is the person who committed the crime, but we have done our best to be able to prove that, and we simply aren't able to prove it.
The police create their own fictitious criminal gang and then seduce the target into joining it. The goodwill of the criminal gang brings to the target material benefits, companionship, steady work.
They engage in what look like criminal activities to the suspect, although they in fact aren't. They're all mock situations. And the purpose of the exercise is to get the suspect to confess to the crime that they believe he committed.
The case facts dictate the approach that they're going to have to this, who the target is, what the nature of the crime is, and what the location that they're operating in. And so there's a basic, call it a script, but in a sense it's non-scripted because they have to be very reactive to how things unfold.
It was actually on the day that Mika died that we codenamed this operation SASH, S-A-S-H, which stood for Safe and Sound in Heaven.
In this case, undercover officers spent 8 months wining and dining Spencer Jordan and Marie Magoon.
Doing fun things like going bungee jumping and going to hockey games.
The couple were willing participants, but they'd still have to come clean about their past to Mr. Big in order for him to help them.
How's it going? Stressed.
Mr. Big comes in. He is supposedly the head of this criminal organization. In fact, he's a senior police officer. And the working officers in the organization convince the suspect that he needs to confess the crime they believe he committed to Mr. Big, because if they share each other's crimes between them, then it means that none of them will betray the others.
Psychology of human behavior is a fundamental thing to undercover operations. That's what you're doing, is you're manipulating people's behavior and motivation. So it's all a manipulation game.
On this day, Mr. Big told Spencer Jordan he had information the police were going to lay charges in Mika's death.
They're coming to arrest you. They're going to throw your ass in jail.
That's what I figured.
But the subtext is, I can do something about that. I can help you out of this. And the target knows that. So they're going to be forthcoming with the details.
I end up taking a little bit of anger out on my daughter. No, I didn't hit her. More or less just pushed her. But I remember her falling back on her hard tile floors. And she smoked her head pretty good.
Welcome back to Crime Beat. 6-year-old Mika Jordan is deceased. Her own father, Spencer Jordan, is a prime suspect, along with his partner, Marie Magoon. Well, now investigators turn to a Mr. Big operation, hoping to uncover the truth. We now return to Jayme Doll with the Mr. Big Playbook.
I hit her. Hit her somewhere in the stomach area. And she fell over. I hit her hard. So I guess the best way to put it is I didn't hold back.
Hours into the conversation, Spencer Jordan finally came clean.
The absolute foundation of psychology for Mr. Big is what's called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In other words, there's a triangle of basic human needs. From the beginning, it's just a matter of survival, then all the way up to being accepted, and then finally being at the top of the totem pole. These Mr. Big stings are staged on multiple layers, depending upon the case facts and the vulnerability of the target, how suitable the target is.
We did a second crime boss with Marie during that covert confession, if you will, provided more details as to the injuries that she had inflicted to Mika.
That's what happened. I burned her alive. Not proud of it, but that's what happened.
And she admitted that she had put Mika in between her legs, grabbed her one hand, and with a lighter with the other hand, burnt the whole palm of the hand for 30 seconds.
She wasn't doing as she was told, and it was fighting Spencer, and Spencer was pushed her pretty hard. He was maybe there, and the kitchen cabinets were here. She hit the cabinet. I was just standing on top of her, holding her hand, and kind of more of a getting mad and shaky. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was on the stairs right because of me a couple of times, and it was my fault.
Did she hit her head?
Oh yeah.
That's Mr. Big at its finest. My impression was that they're getting more than just a confession to wrongdoing. They're getting a narrative which contains details which could be checked against the forensic evidence.
A year after Mika's death, her father and stepmother were arrested. The couple was charged with first-degree murder, but there was no guarantee their confessions would make it into court. No guarantee of justice for Mika. A year before the case went to trial, in 2014, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled confessions obtained through Mr. Big police sting operations tend to produce unreliable confessions, are open to abuse, and must be presumed inadmissible in court.
Every time they said they committed X act, we looked to the medical evidence to establish that this in fact did happen, that it's consistent with. We would look at each injury and the constellation of injuries on Mika and argue that it was corroborative evidence. Yeah, that's part of it. The other part of it is establishing that the will of the suspect was not overborne to the extent that felt that they had to confess to Mr. Big. So we look at financial inducements, we look at any kind of vulnerabilities they might have, and the way that the undercover operation handled those vulnerabilities, whether they were exploited or not, and how those vulnerabilities were handled.
The Mr. Big evidence was admitted as being, fair and truthful. They were convicted of second degree, which is intentional but not planned and premeditated.
In a rare move, more than 5 years after Mika's life was taken, the Alberta Court of Appeal upgraded the convictions from second degree to first degree murder.
It's finally over.
One of the best things I've ever heard in my life.
It's probably one of the toughest cases that I've had to deal with. I say that on a personal level, on an emotional level, and on a professional level.
And the toll these Mr. Big operations can take on those involved can grow the more layered the sting is. An elaborate operation unfolded in Ontario in September of 2014.
Do you require police, fire, ambulance?
Hello, there's a fire on Pepperstone Crescent.
Okay, where do you see the fire?
In the garage.
The visibility was still, of course, quite low, and as we moved into the garage, we had to get very down, right onto our hands and knees to get very close. That's when we determined that there actually was somebody in the garage.
As we were removing the deceased, I noticed a strong odor of gasoline.
Mother of two, Carmela Knight's body was found amid the rubble of her burnt-out garage.
The pathologist explained that there was no soot in her throat, which means that she was dead at the time of the fire. She also advised that there was blunt force trauma and also a neck compression. So she had determined and classified it as a homicide.
The information we were getting from the family was there's a big problem here. They believe he's involved in the death of his wife. They're making allegations that there's quite a bit of strife going on between David and Carmela, that they were looking to get divorced. There was money issues. They believed he killed her.
We kept calling her, and there was no answer. So I knew that he had done something.
Carmela had filed an emergency motion for an order of exclusive possession of the home and for custody of the children. And that hearing was to occur that Thursday. Fire being on the Monday, this hearing was to occur on the Thursday.
Something was going on, obviously, but we knew David was at the hockey arena. We knew pretty well immediately that he was not near the scene.
Police believe there may have been other people potentially involved in a plot to kill Carmela, suspects connected to David Knight, including his brother Matt and friend Graham McDonald.
At this point in the investigation, we were also considering doing an undercover operation.
But police needed to be strategic when picking their target.
Mr. Big operations usually focus on highly susceptible and highly vulnerable individuals.
Some of them are pretty sophisticated criminals, and they won't bite on it. So if you get some, like, to target a full patch Hell's Angel, for instance, there's no way those guys are going to bite on a Mr. Big.
We had David, who was obviously very knowledgeable about police, how we investigated things. We knew he wasn't going to ever talk to us again, or didn't want to. We had Matt, who was in Florida, so he was out of the picture completely for us. And then we had Graham.
We chose him because he was so rattled by this investigation, the fact that he had misled the investigation by providing this alibi of being in Toronto, when in fact there was nothing to suggest he was in Toronto, so he appeared to have some involvement. We arranged for Graham to unknowingly meet an undercover officer, and the two of them became friends.
It developed into a relationship with Graham helping out in certain jobs, like just real easy things to do.
Yeah. As the undercover officers groomed Graham McDonald, investigators discovered surveillance footage of David Knight purchasing jerry cans of gas on 2 occasions on the day of the murder.
But I did see 2 red gas canisters.
David Knight is coming up to the pump. There's a passenger in the car, and the passenger appeared to be Graham. We showed that photograph to the undercover officer, and he felt that it was in fact Graham, and also suggested that the shirt that he was wearing, he had seen that shirt before. So we now know that Graham is with Dave just prior to him leaving for hockey.
We were getting little pieces of, like, yeah, there's a police investigation, my buddy's wife was murdered, stuff that we already knew. We were kind of at a dead end with Graham.
Welcome back. When the Mr. Big playbook doesn't deliver the results investigators are hoping for, the operation often shifts. They adapt, they evolve, and sometimes they bring in new characters to turn up the pressure. Well, that is exactly what happened in the high-profile investigation into the death of Carmela Knight. We now return to Jayme Doll with the Mr. Big playbook.
The undercover starts speaking about this mentor that he has, and it's a older fellow, older than the undercover officer, and he called him Uncle Dan.
Uncle Dan invited the men to go ice fishing. En route, they got pulled over.
It was undercover officers that were portraying as police officers. The officer approached the car, and through the police radio, he ran the police check on the driver, the undercover, and Graham, the passenger. The return on the radio said that Graham McDonald was a subject in a homicide investigation.
There's 2 techniques that go on in these. They're called stimulation, that the operators are doing something to stimulate a behavior or an action. And there's another one called heating them up, all of a sudden making them really on alert. So therefore, because the cops are heating this guy up, then the target is then going back and telling the story to the undercover team, who he is convinced that are the real gangsters. Now he needs the help of them to protect, help of the fictitious mobsters or gangsters to protect him.
He was asking the undercover his advice as to what he should do next.
It's just one of those things that we gotta take care of. Definitely a mistake that I cannot take back. This wasn't something I just fell on my lap. It was something gone through for a bit, thought about for a bit. It was planned. Yeah. How much were they going to give you? 100 grand. 100 grand? Who came up with an idea, like in terms of what to do? Well, he did for the most part. And you said, you do this for me? Yeah. Cover up with a fire? That was the last one. Why did he want him dead? Well, apparently he was looking for money.
The undercover then said, well, I don't know if Uncle Dan can help you or not, but he is also ice fishing, so I could maybe ask him to come over if you'd like. And Graham accepted that, and then Uncle Dan made his way to their ice hut.
It's a stressful situation. I don't
Well,
know.
you no shit, it's stressful.
No.
Okay? You want my help?
Yes.
If you want my help, I need to know what the happened. How much are you involved in this?
To a good extent.
A good extent.
Yeah.
But did you kill this bride? Because if you did, then that's first step. We gotta fix that. Did you kill her? Are you nodding your head yes?
Yes.
Okay. What do you want from me? You just want this to go away?
Yeah.
In the final act of the play police were performing, Uncle Dan came up with a grand plan to make Graham McDonald feel like he had a way out, and investigators found their way in.
The idea was that they had a person in their friend group who was about to pass away with an illness, and that he was willing to take the fall, but Graham had to ensure that his children were taken care of, so he asked him to do a trust fund for each of his children in the amount of $10,000.
That's a common Mr. Big ploy. They have someone to take the hit instead of him.
He did some setups in the garage for me to make it look the way we did.
Okay.
You know,
So he helped set things, like that part.
Yeah.
It was decided that Graham would hide in the house and await for Carm to come home from work. He spoke about David already having the gasoline there. She defended herself and she fought. And he eventually got her down onto the ground and he strangled her.
This all happened around 5:30, and then I waited till 8. We had burner phones, so I had to be able to have contact with the guy to arrange everything and stuff like that.
Contact with who?
The husband.
It was set up that Graham should approach Dave and ask him for the money that he's owed.
It was then David paid Graham $5,000 toward the murder. Graham also told him about the dying man who was willing to take the fall, but he first needed something of Carmela's.
They had a further meet, and Dave then gave Graham a rosary and said that it belonged to her, belonged to Carm. So as a result of him paying him and passing off this rosary and their conversations during their meet, we felt that we had enough evidence against Dave to draw him into this conspiracy. On that particular day, they were both arrested, charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and arson.
The charges came 5.5 months after Carmela died. More than 4 years later, David Knight and Graham McDonald were convicted of first-degree murder. For his part, David's brother Matt pled guilty to accessory after the fact and received a sentence of time served.
And I just cried, you know, because I never had a doubt, but it was just like, why? Why did you do this? For what?
In this case, the Mr. Big sting helped get convictions, and there are many more stories like it.
You knew this guy or no?
Just total rank.
Just duty.
Going too far. Relaxing.
Oh.
A little too good at what we do sometimes, I guess.
In a dark Calgary alleyway, Tyler Sturra and Robert Reitmeyer randomly, without any motivation, beat a complete stranger to death in 2010. Mark Mariani was just 47 years old.
The undercover operation ultimately, I think, led to the justification for why this occurred to be simply because they could. A disgusting reason. But it truly was as a result of Mark Mariani entering into the alley that night, 2 men, hateful and full of rage, who had been drinking, fueled an attack against Mark that ultimately took his life for no good reason other than they could.
The killers knew of the Mr. Big technique.
Also, another thing, Mr. Big, you got to start being real careful about you.
I know. Yeah.
Watch out. Now is the time. Watch out for Mr. Big.
Yeah, agreed. 100%.
They got absolutely nothing but Mr. Big.
He didn't know it then, but at the time Sturrup gave that warning, he was already deeply woven into Mr. Big's web.
In March, the co-accused in this case, Tyler Stirrup, pled guilty to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 10 years. Reitmeyer's trial is expected to last 3 weeks.
The jury decided that Mr. Reitmeyer was an active participant in the murder of Mr. Mariani. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. His parole ineligibility was set at 13 years.
While the technique has had big wins, it also comes with some big risks.
It's effective. It can be very useful. Some bad guys have been caught and convicted who would otherwise have probably gotten away with murder. No dispute on that. However, there's an aspect to it which creates a risk of wrongful convictions because of false confessions.
But anger was put aside for anguish today. The congregation heard about a girl who was going to be student body president. Friends called her a bundle of energy.
Small town Manitoba shattered after a murder at a music festival in 1990.
When I arrived at the scene approximately 10:50 hours yesterday morning, the body was floating half submerged in the water there.
Woodstick will be remembered as the first and last concert 16-year-old Brigitte Grenier ever attended.
The terminology I was given was the asphyxiation due to strangulation and associate causes were sexual assault and blunt force to the head.
After interviewing more than 300 people, late today, a break in the case. Police had arrested a 19-year-old man, Kyle Wayne Unger, a former classmate and friend of the slain teen. A 17-year-old who can't be identified was also arrested. Both have been charged with first-degree murder.
But the charges did not stick initially.
Now, 6 months later, the charges against Unger are stayed.
Supposedly his teeth marks linked him to the victim, and the best experts have offered conclusive opinion that it was not his teeth.
The case is not closed. In fact, a police investigation is continuing, and charges against the 17-year-old remain.
According to court documents, on June 13, 1991, undercover RCMP officers staged a Mr. Big sting, where Unger believed he was being recruited to join a criminal organization involved in the illegal drug trade.
Kyle Unger is as good an example of a vulnerable person being sucked into a Mr. Big operation as you can imagine. He was essentially penniless, homeless, and easy pickings. Suddenly, he's with these people who are giving him thousands of dollars and offering to give him thousands more in the future.
Details in the court documents explain on 4 separate occasions Unger advised operatives he had been wrongfully imprisoned for murder. The operatives made it clear that in order to be part of the organization, they needed someone that they could trust. Kyle Unger confessed to the murder of Brigitte Grenier 9 days into the 10-day operation.
Manitoba prosecutors managed to successfully prosecute Kyle Unger for a crime he had nothing to do with, and you only had to look at the case to realize he had nothing to do with it.
The Crown also argued a hair found on the victim belonged to Unger. That, along with the undercover confession, would be enough to seal his fate.
After 15 hours of deliberations, the 8-man, 4-woman jury found both 20-year-old Kyle Wayne Unger and 18-year-old Timothy Lawrence Houlihan guilty of first-degree murder.
Both men appealed their convictions. Houlihan was granted another trial. He died by suicide in jail before it started. Kyle Unger's appeal was dismissed. And in the early 2000s, it finally did.
During a sweeping review of cases in Manitoba involving hair evidence, that DNA testing showed that hair on the victim's clothing was not Unger's.
On October 23, 2009, Kyle Unger was acquitted.
I'm very happy I can start my life now. I can now start my brand new life.
Unger says he was pressured to confess and wants Canadians to know he did not kill his high school friend.
When you're young, naive, and desperate for money, they hold a lot of promises to you. So you say and do what you have to do to survive.
Since the early 90s, the Mr. Big technique has been used widely across Canada. But in 2014, a case out of Newfoundland would change the rules on how Mr. Bigs can operate and be used in court.
Nelson Hart was convicted a cold-blooded child killer.
And this already went off one each.
Officers posing as gangsters got him to confess to drowning his 3-year-old twin daughters in Newfoundland in 2002.
There were no witnesses to what happened, so police recruited Hart to join a phony crime network, all part of a Mr. Big operation.
Nelson Hart was poor, socially isolated, and he was subjected to an invasive Mr. Big operation that lasted 4 months. He came to see his membership in the gang as his ticket out of poverty. So when Mr. Big asked him why he had killed his daughters, he said the drownings were an accident. Mr. Big didn't believe him. Mr. Big accused him of lying. Hart then capitulated. He admitted killing his daughters by pushing them into the lake.
Hart's first-degree murder conviction was initially overturned on appeal in 2012. The Supreme Court of Canada upheld that decision and ruled the confession he gave to undercover police posing as mobsters cannot be used against him.
Hart's lawyers argued he's a social outcast who felt pressured to make a false confession. The court agreed, writing Mr. Big operations can become abusive and they can produce confessions that are unreliable and prejudicial.
Until Hart was decided, Mr. Big confessions went in automatically, however unreliable they were.
They changed the burden of proof to be on the Crown or prosecutor to prove that they were admissible.
Well, that means they cannot be put into evidence, Mr. Big confessions, unless the prosecution can show a reliability by showing the content of the confessions reveals that the individual knows more than he would unless he had committed the crime in the first place. And secondly, that the confessions were not caused by improper inducements or threats of violence.
Before Hart, the confession itself would be enough to get a conviction, because most murder trials are jury trials. Now you need independently corroborative evidence accompanying the confession.
Is it difficult since Hart even to get cases to remain inadmissible?
In my view, it can be far more difficult than it should be.
4 years after the Supreme Court's decision on Nelson Hart, Calgary police initiated a Mr. Big sting in an effort to solve a murder case that had gone cold for 16 years.
When the first responders arrived at the house, they found Terry Ann deceased by the front door inside the house. They also found 3 children that were locked in their rooms in the house as well. But certainly looking at the victim, it was pretty clear that the victim had been killed.
Welcome back. A young Calgary mother has been found murdered in her own home, leaving her family searching for answers and justice. As investigators work to uncover the truth, police launch a covert Mr. Big operation involving a close relative. We now return to the conclusion of the Mr. Big playbook.
Terry Ann Dauphiné was only 24 years old. The Métis mother of 3 had a dream of being a doctor one day, but her life was suddenly taken in late April of 2002.
The autopsy later determined that the victim had been strangled, and it was pretty clear that we had a homicide.
I guess I have to assume that I'm
I do. I
prime
really,
suspect.
I really do. I do, Ken. And I think you realize that too.
I can say that there was no doubt within the homicide unit that this was our suspect, and it was the only person that we were looking at that time. When talking to the Crown Prosecutor's Office at the time, they didn't feel that there was enough evidence to charge anybody, even though we had a suspect, which was the estranged husband. So we released him without charge.
In 2018, investigators concocted a Mr. Big Sting, dubbed Operation Homefront.
The undercover members befriended Mr. Dauphiné, and in the course of befriending him, they offered him a job and took him out for some meals. Basically, it was an organization that was involved in trucking, but that they had a couple of side businesses involved with illegal gun trading and the sale of forged passports.
In the presence of this undercover officer, he received a phone call from a homicide detective, again all set up, saying, listen, we're going to bring you in on the murder of your wife.
That's when Ken Dauphiné met the perceived leader of the criminal organization, Mr. Big.
Mr. Big says to him, like, I need to know the details because I have connections with police, with judges, with prosecutors, but I need detail so that we can make sure we get you out of this, or we can move you someplace where they'll never catch up with you.
It's not just lucrative paid work that gets the target's attention. They forge a personal connection with the target. They let him know that they like him, they trust him.
I know it's hard to talk about tonight. Well, you know, I can only talk about so much. And I hope you can appreciate that. I'm not going to lay out a confession for you. That's just bullshit all over again. That's nothing.
So you have zero recollection that you had anything to do with Terry's murder?
Correct. Except that I feel that it's all my fault.
Why do you feel it's your fault?
Because I'm the head of the house.
Mr. Dauphiné never made a full confession to Mr. Big, and everything that was spoken would be, inferences would have to be drawn from it. So his friend, the undercover officer, is then saying to him, okay, look, we can't let you get arrested. We're gonna move, we're gonna hide you. And they're going from hotel to hotel.
I think it was because I was leaving. And I think I just grabbed her and tossed her away. She went down funny. And that was like panic mode.
A day after that conversation, Ken Dauphiné was arrested.
The Crown's theory was that at some point on the evening in question, Kenneth Dauphiné got angry and put the children in the bedrooms and strangled Terry Ann and left her dead.
But authorities were relying heavily on the evidence gathered in the Mr. Big Sting, and before the trial could even start, a voir dire was held to determine if key evidence, including the Mr. Big Sting, would be allowed.
The hardest thing that he said in terms of evidence against him was that he grabbed her and that he knocked her out of the way and that she fell down funny. He then went into panic mode and he left. So although that certainly implicates him, it's not the strongest confession by any means.
Our position is that this evidence was not admissible primarily because it was unreliable, that there wasn't any corroboration support for the things that Mr. Dauphiné was saying to the undercover police officers. And so it really could have been the result of just the inducements, him wanting to stay involved with these undercovers and their gang.
They can create a very credible fantasy world, and that's what they do. And this manufactured make-believe cinema verite is what the target is seduced into being part of.
You don't get to pressure people unfairly. And that was one of the problems for the police in Mr. Dauphiné's case, that they had pressured him so that there was actually physical changes to him, personality changes over 4 days where they had him on the run.
Nearly 2 decades after Terry Ann Dauphinée was killed, the then Court of Queen's bench justice Rosemary Nation ruled the Mr. Big operation was inadmissible. In her decision involving the Mr. Big operation, Justice Nation noted Dauphinée never gave much detail, nor did he describe what happened on the evening of Terry Ann's death, other than a few fragments of memory. She added the totality of the interrogation led to confusing and contradictory answers against a background of the accused constantly reaffirming that he has no or limited recollection of events.
She set everything out fairly and then was actually critical of the police for the tactics they had used in this one, for them involving the teenagers at Mr. Dauphiné's home with no one being there and telling them dad was going to be charged with killing their mother and just sort of leaving them on their own to sort that through, however emotionally, physically it took a toll on the children. She was, highly critical of that, as she should have been.
With the key evidence ruled inadmissible, the prosecution decided to stay proceedings, essentially halting the court process.
Some people who don't understand the justice system have trouble with it. They think, well, if it wasn't Mr. Dauphiné's, he's not guilty, then someone else had to do it. But if there is no somebody else, then it had to be Mr. Dauphiné and he should have been found guilty. But that's not how the system works. The system works this way. If someone is charged with an offense, the prosecution must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person did it.
And I respect the legal system. It just personally is heartbreaking that I feel that we weren't able to give that closure to the family. From my perspective, I'm super proud of all the work that went on to get answers for Terry Ann's family.
I just want her to be remembered as a really kind person who loved her kids. I just want her kids to understand at some point in their lives that they had a wonderful mother that they didn't get a chance to enjoy. That's what it comes down to. It's more important to me than anything.
Mr. Biggs remain controversial. In the United States, while there have been cases where undercovers lure terrorism suspects into criminal activity, the tool is often seen as teetering too close to coercion and entrapment. In Canada, the method to solve homicides appears to be here to stay, for now.
They're certainly intrusive, and even if unsuccessful, what is the legacy to the accused person from having endured several months of state-financed deceit and a change in the trajectory of your life? I'm not a philosopher, so it gives me pause.
Do you think Mr. Biggs are still necessary?
Absolutely, in the right circumstances, when there's no other avenue and you're dealing with a very serious crime. They have to be dealt with on a big dose of common sense.
I don't think they should be banned. I think they can be important investigatory tools, and they can solve murders that would otherwise remain unsolved. That no confession should go in that doesn't contain information that could only be known to the perpetrator.
Polarizing or not, the Mr. Big playbook continues to play out, perhaps even right under our noses.
One day, since in my retirement, I wandered into the middle of a big Mr. Big sting, which I know it had written all over it. I could see what was going on. And then as I walked on the ferry, I could see where the cover team was. Well, I made slight eye contact with the main operative who was with the target at the time. And I gave just a slight thing like this. He knew that I made him. And you know, a cop can smell another cop, right? You know them. And he just gave me a very slight wink and carried on his way. So you never know. You could walk right by one, you wouldn't know it.
Well, despite its controversial use and mixed outcomes, Canada isn't the only country using this method to solve homicides. Law enforcement agencies in Australia, New Zealand, and the Netherlands have all adopted the technique. I'm Anthony Robart. Thank you for joining us tonight on Crime Beat. Want more episodes of Crime Beat? Listen to the Crime Beat podcast, now for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you find your favorite podcast. And for past episodes of Crime Beat, go to the Global TV app, visit globaltv.com, or check out our Crime Beat YouTube page.